Thanks, everyone. I wanted to start there because I think as we're talking about this watershed moment and how I think going forward, something we wanted to do was, think about what watersheds we are in. And in Utah, we have the Great Salt Lake watershed, the Great Salt Lake Basin, and the Colorado River Basin, or the Colorado River watershed. So those are two of the main watersheds we'll be talking about today on the panel. And I just really appreciate you all sharing your piece of those places. So the panel today is also about imagining how we go forward, but to do that, I think we also have to look back to understand how we got to this place in the first place, and where we are even at in this moment. We just had 2 wet winters, which Chandler talked about, but I think it's fair to say we're not in the clear. Climate change is real in here. So I wanted to start out by just talking about what is our current crisis and what's the outlook for the next 100 years. And I'm going to pass it to Bonnie to start us off on this one.
Because I am the owner of a crystal ball.
Yeah, exactly.
I think if we just back up a couple years, the way we measure, the way we think about a terminal lake is in order to keep it at its happy range of elevations, we need to get the amount of water in, the same amount of water in that goes out. And the way we get water into Great Salt Lake is mostly from snowmelt that trickles down the watershed and fills the lake. And the way we get water out is only through evaporation, because there is no heading to the ocean like where I'm originally from on the East Coast. So it's that equation is really important, and you might get overwhelmed with the complexity of the numbers and what was that right elevation number again. But it's pretty simple to think about just making those numbers match, right? And so we did not do that for several decades. We were going down, 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 on an average of losing 6 feet per year since the 80s, since the high point of the floods in the 80s. So that was largely due to pulling too much water for diversions for other activities upstream, right? Development, industry, agriculture. So that was not then climate change. So now we're seeing the pressures of climate change, where we have hotter summers and where we have more precipitation in the form of rain. So that changes that equation, because rain rolls off the top of the ground quickly and it evaporates more readily than snow, which can trickle down slowly and recharge the aquifers, right? So getting more rain and less snow is not good for us, and higher temperatures earlier in the spring means the same thing. If you get a strong runoff really fast, it'll evaporate. So higher temperatures not good. Also, it increases the evaporation rate, so the rate of evaporation from the lake. So that's a long way around saying, where are we? So we went down, 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 and we ended up at this elevation that was the lowest elevation, 4188.6, if you care. But the lowest elevation that had ever been recorded at the lake. And that happened in the fall of 2022, in November. So always the high point is like May or the beginning of June, and always the low point is, after the evaporative hot summer season, right? So that's normal. So where are we right now? We're at the high point of this year, right? And we had this robust, crazy snow last year. And that allowed us to fill the lake almost 6 feet. But every summer we lose 3 feet of elevation to evaporation. So we got a +6. We were behind 11, by the way, to the happy place. We got a +6 minus 3, which is what? 6 minus 3 is 3, right? See how you can do that? So we ended up at the end of the year up 3, and the really good thing that isn't simple in the math is we also filled the reservoirs. So this year, the snow we got didn't have to first fill the reservoirs, it could trickle down, and so we're still getting some benefit from last year. I guess that's what I want to point to. So yes, the lake is up, And now we're up probably 6 feet from that low, but we're going to lose 3 feet this summer, right? So we're going to stay pretty stationary. We're going to be a little lower, I predict, than where we were at the end of last year, but we're still getting some benefit from last year. So next year is the year I'm worried about. And I think a lot of us that study these cycles are worried about that. So that's kind of where we are. Does that help?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Does anyone else want to jump in on this question? Well, Bonnie, to get back to the other part of the question, what do you think the outlook is for the next 100 years?
100 years. Yeah. Okay. So when I first moved to Utah, I spent a lot of time hiking and backpacking and learning to love this landscape because it's amazing. And I remember when I would be down in the Southwest and I would go to a historic and sacred site like Hovenweep, the signs or the people, the rangers, would always say things like, 1,200 years ago, all these people left and we don't know what happened. We don't know where they went. They disappeared, this mysterious thing, right? Well, I can tell you there's lots of people who actually do know the stories about what happened, and those stories have been passed down in oral histories, and that's great, and you can tell me way more than that. But what's interesting to me is now we know scientifically what happened. 1,200 years ago, there was a mega drought, so folks that study this paleohydrology, so think paleontology, but now you're thinking about water, they study things like soil moisture signatures and tree rings to see growth in the trees at that time. And what we see in the Southwest is that every 1,200 years there's a mega drought, which means it lasts for decades. And that was 1,200 years ago. So we're currently in a mega drought, and our patterns of drought that we've seen over the last 15 years bear that out. It was predicted, and it's exactly as predicted. That is separate from climate change, and that is separate from water diversions that are causing problems in this terminal watershed. So for 100 years, you're going to make me answer that question, right? So the pressures are bigger, and the pressures are going to be stronger, and the system will not survive without intervention.